Hello, everybody, and welcome to History/Law Bite number 139, dated December 23rd, 2020. I'm Walter, your mobile historian and blue-collar scholar. This History/Law Bite is entitled Georgia versus Brailsford, 3 U.S. 1, 1794. Georgia versus Brailsford is a unique case in the history of the U.S. Supreme Court, as it is the only case in the history of the U.S. Supreme Court where a jury was empaneled to essentially help the court reach the right conclusion, if you will. All right? This wasn't a typical jury that you're thinking of. This jury was more or less a team of experts, well seasoned in merchant practices and merchant law. As American merchant law was very immature and still in development at this time, the court essentially empaneled this jury of experts, to ensure that they themselves had interpreted the appropriate laws correctly. All right, the jury, in this case, as it is in any case, may find a different conclusion than what the law would require, all right, aka nullification. But that, ladies and gentlemen, was not what occurred, all right? So this jury is a team of experts, and that is exactly how they functioned, okay? So before we get into the facts of the case, let's do our context review first. This is the 1790s. The United States is a very young nation. The end of the Revolutionary War is just a little more than 10 years behind us at this point, okay? So needless to say, there's still a great deal of acrimony between the United States and its mother country, Great Britain. A significant amount of this acrimony is caused by the failure of both countries to fully live up to the terms of the 1783 Treaty of Paris, which concluded the Revolutionary War, all right? One particular provision of the treaty, a very important one, required that debts contracted before and during the war still be honored by both British and American debtors, all right? So it did not matter. Both sides were equally bound to this, all right? American debtors were still required to pay British creditors. British debtors were still required to pay American creditors, okay? Done deal. However, it didn't quite go that way, all right? There was a lot of reneging on the debt, on both sides of the ocean, okay? But the vast majority of failure to pay came from the American side, quite simply because a lot of Americans felt that it was simply unjust for the Americans to still be paying British creditors. After all, they lost the war. Why should we pay them 2 cents? All right? So, indeed, while the British certainly had their share of failures to pay debts, the Americans held much greater fault for this, violation of the treaty. And unfortunately, this was a major thing which soured the relationship between the U.S. and Britain at the time, something that would be resolved to a large extent with the Jay Treaty of 1795, which I talk about in another history bite. So if you want to learn more about that treaty, check it out. All right? Back to this case. All right? U.S. states often complicated the means of debt repayment by confiscating the debts themselves, making them payable to the state rather than to the British creditors, and by also sequestering the debts, all right? And there was typically no limit on how long the debt would be sequestered. So in any case, it's not being paid to the creditor. And that's what happened here in this case of Georgia versus Brailsford, all right? Mr. Brailsford was a British merchant who lent money to several Americans in the state of Georgia, all right? And after the Revolutionary War, with the Paris Peace Treaty signed, he saw that obviously, based on the terms of the treaty, he was able to still collect his debt, all right? The treaty required debts to be paid. So Mr. Brailsford sued, James Spalding in the Supreme Court of the United States, all right? Under its original jurisdiction, all right? Yes. Might sound weird, but yes, under the court's original jurisdiction, Mr. Brailsford took this case right to the U.S. Supreme Court. Right? The state of Georgia, however, caught wind of this and intervened in the case and asserted that the debt was not owed to Mr. Brailsford, but it was owed to us because we have sequestered it. Okay? And this is not a complicated case. So the question presented to the Supreme Court, quite simply, was, did Georgia sequester or confiscate the debt. All right? And essentially, Georgia is asserting that they've confiscated it, not just merely sequestered it. All right? And if they did confiscate it, was the statute which allowed for the confiscation of the debt still valid in lieu, because with respect to the Paris Peace Treaty of 1783? Was the statute that allowed them to confiscate or sequester the debt, okay, legal in light of the Paris Peace Treaty of 1783? Okay? And interestingly enough, with this case, the court heard 4 days of oral arguments. 4 days, something almost unheard of today, where each side has 30 minutes to present. Court heard oral arguments for 4 days, okay, in Old City Hall in Philadelphia at the time, when Philadelphia was still our national capital. I know you knew that already, though, all right? And with the conclusion of oral arguments, the court reached its decision, a unanimous one written by Chief Justice John Jay, America's first Chief Justice. The court concluded, quite simply, that Georgia had only sequestered the debt, not confiscated it. And even if it had confiscated the debt, the terms of the 1783 Treaty of Paris would have effectively nullified the statute allowing for the confiscation, and therefore the debt was still obligated and to be paid to Mr. Samuel Brailsford. All right? So, Georgia lost the case. All right? And with the decision itself, the jury was given instructions by Chief Justice Jay, okay, the typical jury instructions, based on the facts. And of course, Jay also hinted that, the jury also has the power to rule on a matter of law as well in making its decision, all right, using the law and fact to make its decision, essentially nullification, all right. Jay is definitely hinting at nullification with that. However, the jury found in favor of the defendant, Mr. Brailsford, and others listed in this case, all right. So essentially the jury affirmed the finding of law by the Supreme Court, all right. As the jury was a team of experts here, the court obviously felt very confident that they had reached the right conclusion, as the jury found for the defendant, Mr. Brailsford, on both of the questions presented, okay? Those questions, of course, being whether or not the state of Georgia had merely sequestered or had confiscated the debt, and if they did do that, all right, was Georgia's statute essentially nullified by the 1783 Paris Peace Treaty. The court ruled that Georgia, again, ruling was that Georgia had only sequestered the debt. Thus, it had never taken ownership of the debt, so it was still owed to Mr. Brailsford and other defendants listed in this case. And with that in mind, Georgia's statute, even if it had confiscated the debt, was technically in violation of the Paris Peace Treaty of 1783. Okay? Even if it had given itself the power to confiscate the debt, it would have to be invalidated under the Paris Peace Treaty. Okay? So the state of Georgia lost, all right, this case, and that the court found in favor of Mr. Brailsford, and the jury affirmed that finding, all right, in a unanimous decision. All right? So the jury enforced the court's decision, reinforced the court's decision in this case. Okay? Interestingly enough, some facts about this case. It was discovered that a significant amount of this debt, 7,000 pounds at the time, which would be a ginormous amount of money in today's times, much of this debt was never repaid to Mr. Brailsford, and that this debt was very regrettably tied to the slave trade. A fact that is very disheartening, but one that must be faced with respect to American history. In 2016, 3 U.S. Supreme Court justices did a reenactment of this case at Old City Hall in Philadelphia. It was presided over by Chief Justice John Roberts and Associate Justices Stephen Breyer and Samuel Alito. And they reenacted the whole thing with just about in its entirety, with the sole exception of the 4-day oral argument. Okay. And of course, the court reached the same conclusion that it did in 1794. And the jury, which consisted of a great deal of actually British jurists, okay, also affirmed the findings of the 1794 jury. So, yes, this is Georgia versus Brailsford. Very interesting case, one whereby the Supreme Court of the United States impaneled a jury to essentially ensure that they were correct in their findings with respect to the law. And the jury did affirm their findings, all right, in favor of Mr. Brailsford. Okay, so Georgia versus Brailsford, 3 U.S. 1, 1794. Okay, the only case in U.S. Supreme Court history in which a jury was impaneled to essentially ensure that the court itself was correct in its interpretation of the law. All right, any questions, controversies? Feel free to leave them down below and I'll be happy to answer them. If you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, I invite you to do so right now and hit that little bell so you will receive further updates, okay? Thank you so much for listening to this History Law Bite on Georgia versus Brailsford. Hope you found it to be interesting. I know I did. Very interesting case, as a matter of fact. All right? Take care. Stay safe out there. And I look forward to teaching you at the next bite. Have a great day.